Om Tat Sat, Shobnaji, divine blessings. Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatitam Gagana Sadrisham Tattvamasya Dilaksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam Bhavatitam Traguna Rahitam Sadgurum Tam Namami. Adorations to the Divine Preceptor, who is the bliss of Brahman, the giver of supreme joy, the embodiment of pure consciousness, beyond the pairs of opposites, vast like the ether, infinite, eternal, beyond all modifications. To that divine Guru I offer my adorations. Om Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha, Pahi Mam, Shri Ganesha, Shri Ganesha, Shri Ganesha, Rakshamam, Jai Saraswati, Jai Saraswati, Jai Saraswati, Pahi Mam, Shri Saraswati, Shri Saraswati, Shri Saraswati, Rakshamam, Jai Shri Lakshmi, Jai Shri Lakshmi, Jai Shri Lakshmi, Pahi Mam, Jai Shri Lakshmi, Jai Shri Lakshmi, Jai Shri Lakshmi, Rakshamam, Jaya Guru Shiva Guru Hari Guru Ram Jagat Guru Parama Guru Sadguru Sham Hari Guru Advait Guru Ananda Guru Om Chida Guru Chidgana Guru Chinmaya Guru Om Om Tat Sat Om Tat Sat Om Tat Sat Om Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Om. Om Tat Sat, divine blessings. I hope everyone is doing well this evening, and welcome to Yoga Vasistha. It is April 24th, 2025. And please let me know if there's any connection issues or any audio issues or anything like that, because we just had a storm come over, so I don't know if the signal will be a little messed up. And I wanted to start off this evening with a poem from Yoga Mystic Poems by Swami Jyotirmayananda. And this is another one of his writings that you can purchase on yrf.org. And it's called Such is a Sage. And it kind of goes a bit with this evening, what we'll be going over. Such is a sage. His serenity manifests in the blue sky, his beauty in the silvery clouds, his grace adorns the golden dawn, his joy springs through an innocent fawn, His majesty manifests through mighty mountains. His profundity reveals through the deep oceans. His glory is sung by the gentle breeze as it softly whispers through the trees. Such is a sage whose cosmic life enters into all without strife. In him, eternity and infinity entwine in the realization of the truth divine. It's a nice poem. So last week we finished section 12 of Mumukshu Vyavahara Prakarana of book 1. And we are in book 1, Yoga Vasistha by Swami Jyotirmayananda. And so we covered the evils of the world process and the glory of wisdom. And this evening is going to start off on a whole new kind of topic. It all goes together, but I call it a different topic because the title of this section is also the title of a book that Swami Jyotirmayananda wrote. And so section 13 is Introduction to the 4 Gatekeepers. The first gatekeeper, SHAMA, serenity. So I wanted to show y'all, this is the other book that I was mentioning, The 4 Gatekeepers at the Palace of Liberation. And you can also get this on yrf.org. And I debated on reading the section in it that covers SHAMA, but it would make me go quite a bit over the timing. So if y'all want me to actually do videos for this, and I can upload them directly to YouTube, and so then y'all can follow along in this one also, alongside Yoga Vasistha. Because a lot of scriptures in Swami Jyotirmayananda's writings, they overlap and they go very well together. It's very complementary. So I always advise that. But I'll read a little bit out of it at the end, so y'all can get an idea about it. So, starting section 13, Introduction to the 4 Gatekeepers. The first gatekeeper, SHAMA, serenity. Sage Vasistha said, having attained enlightenment, sages roam in this world like emperors. They neither grieve during adverse conditions, nor desire prosperous conditions in life. And so sages, due to their detachment from worldly objects, and they aren't desiring or craving, they don't have the attachments, so they don't go through the grief, stress, and sorrows that we cause ourselves due to these attachments. And when adverse conditions come, which everyone goes through adversity and prosperity, they're the two sides of the same coin. And so you're not always stuck in one of them. Eventually it'll switch. And then it'll switch again, then it switches again. And it just keeps going. So during adverse conditions and prosperous conditions, the sages, they don't grieve or desire them. So they have that equal mind, the level-mindedness, the one-pointed mind during these times. Though performing their daily duties well, they are actually non-performers of action because of their inner detachment. So in this one sentence, this actually describes what is called action in inaction and inaction in action. So they still live in the world and perform daily duties like upkeeping with hygiene, health, eating food. things like that. Those are daily duties as a human being in order to live. And then also respecting the body, the human embodiment, because it is a blessing from God, and so it should be respected and treated well, and you take care of it. And non-performers of action is its inner detachment. So it's not being detached in the way of where you just sit there and you do nothing, like your idle life. You're still performing actions, but there's no expectation on the outcome of the action. There's no attachment to the fruit or the reward or outcome of the action. And so the action is still being performed, but there's the inner detachment. And then it is also performed as a sacrifice and a service to God and to humanity also. The constant recollection of objects and the eagerness to acquire them. These are primary causes for the distractions of the mind. Devoid of these, the mind of a sage becomes like the nectarine moon, abounding with infinite bliss. Sorry if y'all hear the fan on my computer. It just turned on. I'm not quite sure why. Okay, so the constant recollection of objects and the eagerness to acquire them. When we think of something that we might want, or something that we once had that we might have lost, or it got broken, or there's an internal regret of selling it or getting rid of it, throwing it away, donating it, and then you keep having the recollection, the memories with the attachment to the memory and the attachment to the object. And then also eagerness to acquire objects. And so when there's something that you really, really want, and you might be saving up money for it, and they might be sold out or something, and you just kind of stress, and there's anxiousness in attaining these things or getting these things back, or there's pain involved in the recollection of what one used to have before they didn't have that object anymore. So these are primary causes for distractions of the mind. Devoid of these, the mind of a sage becomes like the nectarine moon, abounding with infinite bliss. And so the sage no longer is attached to worldly objects, because the sage has inner detachment. When the mind is immersed in the bliss of the self, it does not create the illusions of distraction, nor does it run after the vasanas, the subtle desires sustained by the ego. It renounces its childish fickleness and enjoys the glory of the self. So when the mind is immersed in the bliss of the self, we don't have the illusions of distraction. And so this is where it comes down to the power of the mind, because anything and everything can be blamed as a distraction. And I remember Guruji told me this story a few years ago, and it was because I actually called him, and I was being very distracted during my meditations because some kids were screaming outside really, really loud. And being a mother and hearing children scream, it made me feel anxious because my mind went to, what if they need help? What if they're hurt? What if they're not okay? But they were just playing and screaming outside really loud. And so he told me this story about how ashram that had devotees that were outside, and they were trying to do their meditation, and on the other side of the river there was construction going on, and so there was a lot of loud noises, and there was the constant banging really, really early in the morning. And so the head of the ashram told the devotees to, every time you hear that banging, say Om. And so that's how the mind, instead of being distracted by a sound, like a worldly sound, and then blaming that sound instead of a lack of concentration, you turn that distraction into like a guidance in a way for the meditation. So when we're immersed in the bliss of the self, we don't find all these illusions of distraction, and the mind isn't running after desires that are entwined with our ego and the things that we want or we think that we want. And so it renounces its childish fickleness and enjoys the glory of the self. An aspirant must continue to listen to the teachings about the self again and again, and then he must reflect upon what he has heard. And I've touched on this in a few of our Satsangas, where asking questions is really important, and attending Satsanga and listening to our spiritual teachers and gurus and the sages and saints, and these lessons and these stories and the scriptures that are being taught and that we are hearing, we should reflect upon what we have heard and think about, how can I take this and how can I apply it to my daily life? How can this scripture be applied to modern daily living, where we might be more busier than usual, and so we might struggle to fit time in for certain things that support our spiritual journey. And so we have to listen again and again, and then the best way to learn things is to constantly hear them repeated. And then the more that we do this, the more it sticks. Having rendered the mind one-pointed, he should allow the mind to flow on to Brahman by the practice of profound meditation. So once we've gotten to the point of one-pointed mind, and when we sit for meditation, and after a while you can kind of immerse and sink into that inner quietness, like that inner sanctum of the self, and nothing external is distracting, nothing physically is distracting, because the mind is just one-pointed. It is focused on the divine self. It is focused on God. It is focused on Brahman. And to get to this point, we must consistently do our meditation practices. Listening, reflection, and meditation must be continued throughout one's entire life, for the true purpose of one's existence is the attainment of self-realization. A person is not really tortured so much by fever and other diseases, poison, or adversities, as he is by the miseries arising out of his own folly. And by listening to the scriptures, this inner folly, ignorance, is removed from the mind. So when we listen to the scriptures and we're learning and we're applying the teachings in daily life, and we're thinning out that veil of ignorance that we all come into the world with, we begin to have the one-pointed mind and develop an inner calm and an inner peace. And so even when the physical body is going through such fever, diseases, poisons, adversities, etc., these are considered miseries that we put ourselves, because of our ignorance, we are putting ourselves through grief and sorrow and pain and things like that, because the true self is not the physical body, but the physical body is what is affected The true self is not the thoughts and the mind and the emotions that we have day to day. But due to our ignorance, we identify ourselves with these things. Sorry, my voice is like croaking and stuff. My medicine makes my voice do that sometimes. So I'm not sick, it just does it. All adversities, even the most humiliating conditions, arise out of ignorance. It is better to live by begging from the lowliest of men, the outcasts, than to live a life reconciled with ignorance. It is better to be a worm in the hollows of a tree, or to abide in a dark well, than to live a life of folly. So it's better to live a life of, in a way you could say, reduced ignorance, or working to reduce our ignorance, than to continue living on with ignorance. And that's where the saying ignorance is bliss, because it's a lot easier to continue staying ignorant to many things than to put in the continuous self-effort and the continuing to learn and grow and expand. Until the sun of discriminative reason rises in the firmament of the heart, the frost of cravings continues to affect the lotus of human consciousness. But with the rising of knowledge, the lotus blooms, revealing the infinite expansion of the self. So while we're thinning out our ignorance and we are working on ourselves, such as we're reducing anger, reducing stress, and things like that, and we learn more of our true inner essence and what is truth, what is not truth, what is real, what is not real. And you can discriminate between these things. And so discriminative reason, I've mentioned this before, when we talk about discriminative thinking and discriminative reasoning, it's not in the negative manner of discrimination. Discriminative reasoning and thinking is telling the difference between things. And so we're able to recognize self from not self, truth from untruth. And so when this sun of discriminative reason rises in our heart, the frost of cravings continues to affect the lotus of human consciousness. So until we're able to distinguish the true self from not self and real from unreal, we're still going to go through the cravings, the desires, and the attachments in our human consciousness, because we're still identifying ourselves by these things and we haven't risen above it. Men in the world suffer endless miseries due to their own ignorance. Pain follows pleasure, and pleasure follows pain. And so, with pain following pleasure and pleasure following pain, it's the easiest way that I like to describe it, that the majority of people can relate to, is when you have like a craving for something. And it could be a food like ice cream, or it could be shopping and you just really want to go shopping. And in that moment, it feels good. You're enjoying your ice cream or you're enjoying your shopping. And these are really pleasurable things to the mind at that time. But then when you're done shopping or you've eaten all the ice cream and now your mind isn't distracted, your mind isn't being consumed with the pleasurable feelings that you're associating with a worldly object or a worldly activity such as shopping, And so that's where the pain comes in. And so these pleasures of the world, the worldly pleasures, they're all temporary. They are not lasting. We could also think of like the excitement that one experiences purchasing a car or a house or jewelry, things like that. And it's really nice and it's exciting and it's pleasurable, but then it wears off after a while and the mind is no longer entertained by these things. And so the pain sets in, and it's not the physical pain of the body that this is talking about. It is the pain of like anxiety and stress due to the ignorance and identifying how we feel and thinking that we're finding joy through these worldly things, not realizing due to our ignorance that it is not the worldly objects or activities that is the sole source of joy. An ignorant person is constantly led up and down as if he were mounted on a wheel of a machine. The conditions of pleasure and pain are short-lived, like flashes of lightning. And so these feelings of pain and pleasure, they come and they go, they're up and they're down. And due to our own ignorance, we keep putting ourselves in these positions and we're causing ourselves these painful feelings and emotions because of how we're attached to things or how we have a desired or expected outcome of something that's happening. But when we experience these pleasures and the pain, it's short-lived, because the majority of us, when the pain is felt and if there's still attachments that we haven't worked through, then we're gonna go right back to what we think provided us the pleasure. And so then again, we feel better, the brain's happy, the mind's happy, but then you go back down again. And then you're suffering again, you're stressed out, you're annoyed, you're angry. And you keep sitting there saying, well, if I just had more of this, or if I just did this again, then I'd feel a lot better. But that's our own ignorance talking, because joy is not found in these things. An aspirant should seek the support of viveka, discriminative knowledge, and cultivate vairagya, dispassion, by repeated effort, abhyasa, in order to cross the ocean of the world process. So in order to cross the ocean of the world process, there are like requirements in a way that aspirants should go towards and focus on developing. And so viveka, discriminative knowledge, is learning self from not self, truth and untruth, and really putting this into practice and analyzing your own day-to-day life and analyzing your own attachments and how you feel and how you interact with different things and different people throughout the day. Cultivating vairagya, dispassion. And so the dispassion is where these cravings and these desires are thinned out. And so you're not like wanting them anymore. So if you think of shopping in a way, or people who are focused on making a lot of wealth and things like that, the dispassion is the realization that, oh, I don't need that anymore. It's okay to have those things, but the attachment isn't there. And so there's a dispassion. So for someone that might have an attachment to shopping and just buying a whole bunch of stuff for no reason, you don't need it, you just want it. You start realizing, oh, like I keep buying all these things and I feel good temporarily, but then by the next day, I don't feel good anymore. I don't feel good about what I bought. I feel like I wasted money. And so you start to develop a dispassion, realizing, oh, this is a temporary feeling that I'm getting from these worldly objects. So I don't really want to do that anymore because I keep causing myself pain. I keep causing myself sorrow. I keep putting myself through this constant cycle. And then repeated effort, abhyasa, in order to cross the ocean of the world process. And so the repeated effort of not only working on meditation and analyzing ourselves, but doing this on a day-to-day basis, not just doing it once a week or twice a week. Like, do it as much as you possibly can. We only get this one human embodiment, and we don't know when our time is up. And we can either choose to work on ourselves on the spiritual journey, or we can continue putting ourselves through the cycles of pain and sorrow. It's personal choice, but I would like to think that others watching are on the same path. And so we repeatedly put in our effort in order to overcome these different things. Having entered this transient world, one who does not endeavor to attain the self is like a person who slumbers in a thatched house that is being consumed by fire. And so the world is transient. It doesn't last forever. This physical embodiment is transient. It doesn't last forever, no matter how much the scientists want to look into extending life. It's still not forever because physical embodiment is not eternal. It doesn't matter what you do. And so it comes into the world, and if we don't look to attain knowledge of the self, and we live a very worldly life, like full of attachments, and we fall into the traps of our own desires and our own ego, and we're full of anger, bitterness, selfishness, all different things, all the demoniac qualities. So the world's so transient, and this embodiment is so transient. It's like a thatched house that catches on fire. It burns to the ground really quick. And then the person sleeping is going to be consumed by it. So when we're asleep to the knowledge of the self, we're letting ourselves be consumed by like the fire of the world process. When a person develops the inclination towards inquiry into the nature of self-realization, he is ready to attain liberation in a short time. True happiness consists in attaining liberation from the wheel of birth and death. There is no real happiness anywhere in the three worlds. Excuse me. So when the individual person is actually wanting to start learning more and is ready to start working on themselves by thinning the veil of ignorance and letting go of egoistic visions and expectations and any other demoniac qualities that that individual may be suffering through, such as like short temper and anger, jealousy, greed, lustfulness, things like that. And so when someone is then inclined towards learning more about the nature of the true self, then they're ready to attain liberation in a short time. You can't force anybody onto this path. You cannot make that choice for them, and we shouldn't do that. And we can share knowledge when that person is ready to hear and listen to the knowledge. And in a short time, a soul can attain liberation as long as that constant inquiry is there and that inclination is there and they stay on that path. True happiness consists in attaining liberation from the wheel of birth and death. So to be liberated from the wheel of birth and death is to not come back and do all this again, because it's not in the Dharma. Believing in reincarnation, the soul, if it doesn't attain liberation, it'll live out the good karmas and stuff in the heavenly worlds, and then it'll expire, it'll go through that, and then come back. And we don't know if we're going to come back for another human embodiment or a lower embodiment, such as an animal or an insect. And when you start having that dispassion and you don't want to go through all this pain that you're now learning about, and so you're not finding the true happiness in the objects of the world. You're not finding the true happiness in the external. You're finding the true happiness that's within, that's internal, that is the true self, that is our nature, that is the essence of who we all are. And that's where the true happiness lies. And so when you know that you can tap into this internal source that we all have, you're not looking at all the external things to provide you that happiness, because you don't have that ignorance anymore of the self. The attainment of self-realization alone brings a person to his ultimate prosperity. Wealth, friends, relatives, diverse forms of religious rituals, pilgrimages, and austerities cannot help a person fulfill the inner urges of his soul. And so the attainment of self-realization is not a tactile thing. It is not a person. It is not something that can only be found in a certain country or on a certain continent. It's not something that can be found during only a certain time of the year. And so you could have all the money in the world, and that's not going to guarantee attaining self-realization. So you could be a rich, famous celebrity or a very rich political leader, and you could find an interest in spirituality, but all that money that you have is not going to suddenly make you a self-realized person. All the friends and relatives that you have, that's not going to fulfill the natural urges of the soul, which is to attain liberation, which is to attain self-realization. Friends and relatives cannot provide this for you. They can provide you scriptures, they can provide you support on your spiritual journey, but they cannot click their fingers and suddenly you're self-realized. And that's one thing that's commonly mistaken in regards to gurus, true legitimate gurus. A lot of people are under the impression that right when you have a guru and you become self-realized. But it doesn't work that way. It's a journey, and it's a lifelong journey. And you continue on that journey. And when a person becomes self-realized, they will know that they're self-realized. Diverse forms of religious rituals. So it doesn't matter how many rituals that a person performs or what kinds of rituals, this is not going to guarantee the self-realization is attained. And so we don't need to look at well, this person has all these things, they're able to perform all these rituals, they have more money to buy this stuff to do all these rituals. We don't need to look at that, because God's not interested in that. God's interested in our natural desire for self-realization, our natural desire for attaining God and uniting with God and having a relationship with God. Pilgrimages and austerities. So these two are things that a lot of people are under the impression, oh, I'll go on a pilgrimage, and they'll choose whatever pilgrimage trip that they want to do, and then they go and perform austerities, and they spend a lot of money doing these things, and they assume, oh, well, I did this, I should come out of this pilgrimage or this austerity performed, and I should be self-realized. But that's not how it works. One should inquire into the art of conquering the mind. This is the secret of attaining peace and contentment. So conquering the mind is learning to slow down the monkey mind, and we do this through the practice of meditation, and also do this through the practice of dispassion. So the mind isn't distracted by thinking about all these different desires for worldly objects. By controlling the mind, a yogi experiences the bliss of the self. Whether walking, sitting, roaming, running, or falling, one must continue to enjoy the fruit of intuitive vision and the blossoms, serenity and contentment of the tree of discrimination. So the bliss of the self is an inner experience. And so no matter where the person is in the world or what they're doing and what's happening around them or what they're having to be involved in for day-to-day living, there's a constant enjoyment of the bliss of the self. And there is a detachment to what is happening, the things that are involved in their life. They're enjoying the intuitive vision. They're enjoying being able to tell truth from not truth, real from unreal, and knowing that all these different things, all these worldly objects are not the source of our joy. They're not the source of our happiness. And so because of this intuitive vision, serenity and contentment blossom. And so the mind becomes serene, the heart is serene, and there is contentment. There is contentment with what one has. There is contentment during adversities, what one is going through. There's contentment even through prosperities, what one is being provided or gifted or given. And so all these things go together. And so with one thing, another thing will blossom, another thing follows. So with intuitive vision, serenity and contentment follow. And so this is where it's going to get into the topic of the 4 gatekeepers of the Palace of Liberation. But tonight's section is only going to cover the first one because it's divided up. Now listen to more about the 4 gatekeepers at the Palace of Liberation: serenity, contentment, inquiry, and good association. Serenity, SHAMA, leads to supreme goodness. It is the highest abode. In fact, it is Shiva himself. It is serenity that dissolves the mist of delusion. Nourished by the nectar of serenity, a person is able to transform hatred into love. Even the most inimical mind is transformed into a friendly mind by the magical power of serenity. And so if you think of someone that is quick to anger or short-tempered, their mind's not really calm. The mind isn't very serene, and most of us, you can kind of tell when you walk into a room or you come across other people and you just kind of get that feeling. And you know, you don't really want to be around it. And so when we go from having anger, or we might be quick to judgment or easily stressed out, and then taking our stress out on anyone around us or things like that, and then we reach serenity and we develop a more serene mind, this is what helps with dissolving the illusion that we're veiled by. This helps thin out that veil. And so instead of that person being really angry and hateful or judgmental towards other people, they're now more compassionate, they're more understanding, because they're learning more about the true self and not what most identify with, which is the physical body or external objects and titles and wealth and things like that. And so when the person becomes more serene, even if someone is getting angry at them or a situation happens, and normally or typically someone would become really, really angry about it, well, this person, they keep more of a level head, level-minded, even-minded, and so they're more serene. And so there's a deeper understanding and a deeper compassion that comes with this serenity. And so that helps an individual evolve into a more friendly person, more compassion, and things like that. One cannot even have as much confidence in one's own mother as one can have in a sage who is endowed with serenity. So comparing one's own mother to a sage, which is endowed with serenity. So when you think of your own mother, there's an attachment because it's the mother and a child. That's a natural familial attachment. And with that attachment, the mother is always going to, there's always like a level of ego involved with family members, especially with us as mothers that have children. And so you can still be hurt, and the mind isn't as even, like, we can be quicker to anger when our children do something wrong, or they might say something mean to us and your feelings can be hurt, or vice versa. If you're a parent that's easily angered, easily stressed out, quick temper, those kinds of things. But a man of serenity, a sage, cannot be hurt even by demons, evil spirits, enemies, tigers, and snakes. Wearing the armor of serenity, a sage is unaffected by the piercing arrows of misery. And so when we think of our humanly mother, and they can still be affected by things. And then you think of a sage, and they have the dispassion, they have the detachment, and they've trained the mind, and they've conquered the mind, and they've gone beyond the 3 gunas, and they've gone through all of this and have attained such serenity where it's like a level of being unbothered in a way. But not in a bad way, not in a harmful way. So they're not going to sit back and ignore someone that might need help. They're still going to have empathy and compassion and sympathy towards people. And so they can still be impacted by that, but that's in a good way. The love that is awakened in the heart of a person who has seen a serene sage cannot be experienced even towards the dearest of one's relatives. So the love that we feel from our relatives and our family and our friends and our community is like down here. And then the love awakened in the heart of someone who's witnessed a sage is like up here. So it's a lot more, it's a whole different level. It's not a physically worldly love. It is a divine love. It is a love without ego, without judgment, without accusations. It's a whole different level. All the actions of such a sage are commended by all living beings. So everything that a sage does is out of love. Though aware of the faults and deceits of others, a sage endowed with serenity continues to maintain a balanced mind at all times. Excuse me. So if you think of like, even if a sage, like this makes me think of Guruji a lot, because one of the things that I learned from Guruji was how much he knew without you saying a word about it. And he could tell, like, whenever I did phone calls with him, we always did a video call, so he could see my facial expressions and things like that. And you could try to say, no, I'm fine. Like, yeah, nothing's bothering me. I'm doing good. And he would be like, nope, no, you're not. And so sages and saints and gurus they're very aware of the human faults, and if they're being deceived, if they're being lied to, and they understand how ignorant us humans can be. And so they can just sit there and nod their head like they know everything that's going on. And we don't have to say anything. And so even when aspirants or devotees would be angry with their guru or angry with a sage or having disagreements and things like that, they don't argue back. They don't lose their temper with you. They don't name call. They don't make you feel less than or anything like that. Their mind is sharp. Their mind is very, very balanced. His moonlight face is never depressed or elated, even in conditions of death, war, or prosperity. He is unaffected by fear, attachment, and anger. And so this also reminds me of Guruji, especially on his trip. And then just kind of like all the time. Because I have so many, I used to take screenshots on my phone while watching Satsanga, because a lot of times you get this really big smile. And like, it didn't matter what was going on in the world or locally or anything. Like, his face just was always lit up. And he always had the biggest smile and the happiest laugh. And so even all the way up to his trip to India. And I remember talking to him while he was there, and he was sick for a few days, feeling under the weather, and his arthritis was flared up. And he was still so happy and so grateful to go on the trip and just soaking up the nectar and the bliss of everything he was experiencing. And so just totally unaffected. So that little section really does remind me of him. If one does not become identified with the body and does not intensify his egoistic vision, even in the worst of conditions or during long lingering adversities, then he is truly a sage endowed with serenity. Among all ascetics, all learned men, all performers of sacrifices, kings, emperors, and men of power, none can excel a sage endowed with serenity. So that's a really beautiful ending to this section of Yoga Vasistha, because it's such a great way to really reflect on how we are living this embodiment, how we're living out this lifetime on earth, and what do we truly want out of our experience. And like, I'm kind of speechless because I just really love this section, and being supremely blessed with serenity. And when you just think of like adversities that happen to people and things that people suffer through and they go through, and keeping an even mind, and you're not letting it consume you. And it's just such a lovely thing to think about. And so that ends section 13, and we're a couple minutes over time, but I'll read this short section that I mentioned earlier from the 4 Gatekeepers of the Palace of Liberation. So it's not the full section on SHAMA, but it's just a little one because it had a short story. So it's called Making Problems Vanish. When you are serene, you have an objective view of your situations. So objective, not subjective. In this state, your intellect brings you solutions to your problems. On the other hand, when you become agitated and allow your reasoning to be clouded, naturally you do not know how to deal with situations. Although your problems could be easily resolved, because of lack of serenity, the problems linger. One night, a family was packing for a trip. The stern head of the family was constantly agitated. No one could say anything to him. He kept asking his family for a flashlight. It was getting late, but no one dared tell him he was holding it in his own hand. This crude example shows you how agitated conditions prevent you from solutions you have at your fingertips. The restless mind will not listen. Even though you have unlimited resources and people to assist you, they dare not. Lack of serenity breeds disharmony, discontent, agitation, fear, and insecurity. Serenity, on the other hand, dissolves all of these. And so that's from the 4 Gatekeepers at the Palace of Liberation, and it covers SHAMA, serenity, Santosh, contentment, Satsanga, good association, and Vikar, the inquiry into who am I. And that is also available on yrf.org. And pull out the comments Let's see who's here this evening. Aisha Om Tat Sat, divine blessings. Shobna Ji, Om Tat Sat, divine blessings to you. Abhijit Ji, Om Tat Sat. Shobna Ji, thank you. Rupa Renita, Om Tat Sat. Aisha G says we need to experience it for ourselves in order to benefit. Yes, that's one of the great things about being on the path and involved in Sanatana Dharma is it is all experience. Like, you have to go through a lot of things, and from applying what we read and what we learn and things like that. So like Guruji would say, everything in the scriptures and stuff, it's all considered theory until you put it into practice. And then once you put it into practice, that's when you have the experience for yourself, and from experience comes more understanding also. So that's very, very true. Shobna Ji, that is so true. He had a very calm and smiling face. Yes, he did. Absolutely. Always made the day better. So, divine blessings. Thank you everybody for attending Yoga Vasistha Satsanga, and the video will be uploaded on the YouTube playlist. You can search YouTube for, I believe it might still be under my screen name, but I can link it below. But you can search Sacred Perennial and it'll be on there. But I'll post the link in the comments also. Divine blessings. Om Tat Sat.